Brian, you're a physical therapist, so you're a doctor of physical therapy.
Yes.
Where'd you go to school?
University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and then Rockhurst University.
And so you're here practicing in Omaha, Nebraska.
Yes.
Now, you have a great big therapy room out there with 4 spinal decompression machines and the Zone Restorator here. But you've mentioned to me that the patterns of the SI joint misalignment you see in virtually every patient you have coming in the door. Is that correct?
In this clinic, a lot, I would say, majority of the time.
So
if they're here for low back.
If you were to just throw those patients on a spinal decompression machine and not address this SI joint misalignment that you are identifying in at least 90% of the patients that come in the door,
Sure.
would you say that the patients have a misalignment that you haven't got to the crumbling foundational problems if you just use spinal decompression, even if you relieve the pain?
No, I don't think so at all.
What do you think?
Even if you put them on a spinal decompression machine, which we use, and you pull them enough times where their back gives up, they'll feel better.
They'll feel better. So the pain goes away, so they think they're cured.
Sometimes, and sometimes it makes it worse.
Sometimes it makes it worse.
If you pull and their back spasms, or they pull their joint apart, they're laying under, they're really twisted up, and they pull it apart, or they'll get spasm in their neck.
So it compensates. Because if you still have this misalignment in the pelvis,
and you're laying on a flat table, all you can do is twist. You try to fight that table.
so you're saying that even if you relieve the pain and they still have this misalignment in their pelvis, right?
So, yeah.
The pain is going to just switch positions. You might
Yeah.
get rid of it in the low back, and it then travels up the body to the cervical where you have compensation, or it might become a shoulder
Or
problem.
they could get a headache, or they could get knees. It just depends on where they compensate at.
So you've hacked at the leaves of the problem, relaxed the muscles and spasm in the low back that we're doing all the work, but you still have the core cause that's unaddressed.
Why that disc herniated in the first place, or why you have something pushing on a nerve, whether it's a disc or a muscle or a bone impingement on there. You just don't know.
So I just interviewed one of your patients who had excruciating pain where it was to the point where he said his life wasn't worth living anymore. He couldn't stomach the thought of another day waking up in the morning going through with that kind of pain. He consulted several physicians who told him the only thing you can do for this herniated disc, they showed him MRIs of a herniated disc. They said you have to have surgery. One said we have a less invasive procedure where we stick a rod up through your pelvis, and then we can separate the disc and keep you from crunching down on them. And of course the statistics are with people who have hardware put in their back like that, generally they're cutting, I've seen reports as much as 15 to 20 years on average cut out of their life if they are a scoliotic patient who has a rod put in their back. Have you seen that?
I've not seen. I haven't seen any.
But it restricts the motion, and the back is designed to be a fluid motion machine. When you lock up parts of an engine, certainly the engine is not going to be working right.
If you have a pelvis or a scoliotic twisted individual, and you go and you straighten a spine, and you don't do anything to that pelvis, the pelvis is still going to turn just like it is, and that cranium up top is still going to turn just like it is. And I've seen a lot of patients with rods that usually end up coming here for SI joint pain.
SI joint pain because
now
they
can't twist anymore through their spine; they twist all their SI joint.
So a scoliotic person, often the genesis was in their childhood. Something may have happened. They might have these same kind of imbalances. The scoliosis that sets in childhood. If you can get to these people early enough, can you correct that?
Well, I don't know if you can correct it. You can give them tools to offset what their body's trying to do, a pattern that's pulling their bones one way. You can give them things to try to offset that pattern. The problem with that is usually they have this pattern before they develop curve. So usually by the time you see the curve, they're already pretty strong and pretty patterned to be pulling them that way.
So we have muscles that go in spasm, pulling the spine like a tightened string pulling on the bow. In this case, the spine is the bow. The muscles that are locked in spasm are involuntarily contracting, pulling the spine crooked. So if you can relax those muscles in spasm by treating the reason they're going in spasm, which is often the SI joint imbalance, you can relax the muscles in spasm, and they're going to straighten. The spine often can straighten, and that's a measurable correction of the lean of scoliosis.
We'll just ask, why is it one side, why isn't both sides spasming? Why is it one side and not the other? There has to be an underground, something's got to be causing that muscle to stay on. And if that person's got to hold themselves against gravity, and they start getting in a pattern where they do that all the time because of their center of gravity wanting to go over one leg more than the other, they'll just twist to get up there.
Now
It's like you take a tree and you see a tree growing outside of a riverbank, it just curves up.
I was with a woman recently who said she had 3 huge little boys when she was younger. She had these babies, and they were growing like a ball, gaining pounds every day practically. And she would hold them in her left arm while she stirred the dinner pot with her right arm, did her housework with her right arm. This woman had severe scoliosis, and she was able to trace it looking back at how she began to have these imbalances. She did her housework with her right hand while she held these heavy boys in her left hand. And her back compensated. It was like holding a bowling ball in one arm all day long. Can you see that becoming maybe the genesis? Or you're saying that she may have already been in balance, and all she was doing was following that pattern she had already had ingrained. A neurologic pattern, and all she was doing was feeding it.
Because her body was comfortable reaching with that right arm and sitting like that.
And over the years, this got deeper and deeper. So the muscles that were doing all the heavy lifting, the side where she held the boys, went into spasm. It's got tightened, it contracted, it shortened, and the spine turned crooked because those tightened muscles. So she had scoliosis setting in. But the genesis of that probably was her SI joint in her hip.
Not her SI joint, just a pattern she's in. It don't have to be her SI joint. It could be her hip, or could be her temporal.
But it manifested in the SI joint because it was some kind of repetitive motion. We're creatures of habit as humans.
Sure.
It's very hard to break our habit.
If she ended up separating an SI joint like you did, she'd have pain there. But she could have been. It's not really it's not a symptom. It's her. It's not a pelvis. It's not a rib cage. It's what her body's doing. Her brain is. She's in a pattern.
Well,
she keeps overusing the same thing.
In my case, I had learned to compensate and deal with it for years, but I had this pattern wrap up through my back, and I learned to hold myself in certain positions, leaning on one hip, etc., etc. But it was okay, it was tolerable, although I had constant tightness in one area of my body, etc.
Isn't it easier to hold your head up with a stronger muscle than a weak one?
Sure, and that's what happened. And then the one side got weaker than the other side, and the strong side went into spasm. I was always holding my stress in my thoracic region by my scapula on my left side. And I was holding the phone on my left hand while I wrote notes with my right hand. Much like the graphic artists who work with one hand end up with shoulder problems. And it's really the whole way they're torquing their body down to their hip, working their right shoulder on the mouse, with their hand, just like an artist painting with the right hand, just like a pitcher in baseball gets imbalances throughout their body. I had these patterns set up, but it wasn't until I had a traumatic event where all this weight came down on my upper body, and all that weight that came down on my upper body pushed to the point where I felt this happen. Something happened where all this weight, I don't know if it was this way or whatever it was, it felt like this hip kind of slipped somehow. But I could feel that happen. It was a very strange feeling. It didn't feel like a disc crushed. It just felt like something had slipped, and I knew nothing about the SI joint.
Separated a joint a little bit that's not meant to be separated.
And then the patterns got worse and worse. The tightness in this hip.
Because people usually get worse in the pattern because once that happens, and they have pain. Now you don't want to step on that leg. You don't want to do things over there, so you go further to your right. You get you get stronger and stronger in a pattern, which just compounds the problem.
Now this is interesting because my left hip, but my right shoulder has pain. So the left hip is pain, and then it compensates and jumps over to my right shoulder.
Well, if your left hip is coming forward, like on you, you're rotating forward a little bit, your spine then is turning to the right. So you don't walk in a circle to the right all day long, do you?
No, I have to compensate.
You got to drive your car, so if you sit down in your car, but your pelvis is going over here, you still got to drive that way, so you do. So now your right shoulder comes forward. Now you're doing backwards.
So when I push down, when I lied on the machine and I pushed down with my left heel on the machine and I torqued my pelvis, pushed down with my back, raised my buttocks off the bed, but I'm pushing down with this leg and I push this leg over to the side. What did that do in this joint? That somehow...
It didn't do anything to that joint.
Well, did it work the soft tissues? What did it do?
It shut off muscles that you were using to hold yourself in a position.
Okay.
That makes sense?
It shut those muscles off?
You shut them off.
Okay. Because I work the antagonistic muscles?
You can say that.
Okay, so you had me work muscles. The back of my hamstrings felt, they were complaining because I never used them. Why did these muscles back here get atrophied? Because I wasn't using them? Why didn't I feel the same kind of burn back here when I started pushing down with this leg?
Because your center of gravity always wants to go over to this side. So in order to hold yourself up against gravity, you have a hamstring over here holding you up.
So my hamstring here is well developed and strong. And this hamstring...
If you stand, when you shift your weight and you stand on one side, if you shift your weight over here, what's this leg want to do? It just wants to do that. Your left one wants to just bend.
So this is twisted out.
Yeah, so you got a hip flexor that's on to bend this knee, to bend this hip.
And these muscles here are always in spasm right around here.
Yeah.
They're tight.
Yeah, this is actually a pretty good picture of you.
And this is what I do right here.
This is a pretty good picture of you.
And so by forcing me to do this, I shut off these muscles that were pulling this, that were in spasm.
They're pulling this out.
And I work these atrophied muscles back
They're
here.
shutting the ones off that are pulling this forward and this forward.
So over time, what you're having me do is a series of targeted exercise that invoke certain muscles without invoking their opposing muscle group. So I can strengthen that targeted, isolated muscle group to correct the imbalance.
Yep, to maintain.
The learned imbalance. Now how often do I need to come back in? First of all, let me stand here on camera so you can see how I'm used to standing. Scoot over just a little bit. Because I'll often stand on my right leg like this. And my hamstring is well developed back here.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'll often not put my weight on my left. You mentioned often you'll have people jump up and down on one leg. You tell them to do that. And most of the time it's their right leg they're jumping up and down on. Because they don't want to do it on their...
They don't think about it.
They don't even think about it. They just immediately jump on their strong leg.
It's just like any habit you have.
Okay. So I find myself standing on one leg quite often, like this. And that's my stronger leg. This is the side of my body that's stronger.
Yep.
Up here. But these muscles are tight. But as we go up, this arm, my grip strength in this hand is 30% weaker than in this hand. So would that make sense that the stronger leg and the weaker arm, this hip's in spasm, these muscles are atrophied, these imbalances flow, and this is like a kid with building blocks. It flows, it compensates as it goes up.
It could be, or it could be that you're crushing, you're smashing the nerves coming through that outlet, and you're weaker in your hand. Just depends. You don't know, and I don't think anybody can. So.
Sure. All I know is I had my first good night's sleep in 3 years after that treatment yesterday because my hip wasn't all in spasm. My hip seemed to relax, and when it relaxed, these muscles elongated, and they weren't all knotted up, involuntarily contracting. And I felt like more blood supply is getting in there. It wasn't so tight.
It'll come back if you keep doing that.
If I keep standing on one leg. So when I find myself standing on one leg,
Go to the other side.
so I train myself to go to the other side. Because when my daughter held her baby in one arm, she went in spasm up here, because you're doing her housework here. She wasn't shifting the weight.
Or she's not shifting her weight.
So she could have held the baby in the same arm.
Might not have
Just,
nothing,
it might have,
nothing to do with that baby.
with what arm? It could have, she might have been misaligned even
way over
before.
there when she had that baby.
So now I'm standing in a way that's not
Not natural.
natural for me. This is not a pattern I'm used to
No.
doing.
And as soon as you start talking and thinking, you'll go right back over there.
As soon as I start talking and thinking,
Your brain goes somewhere else.
as
Because you have
soon
to think about this.
well, I'm having to think about this, you're right. So the second I stop thinking about this and I go back, there it is, I go back.
But there's millions of them.
And we have all these ingrained patterns. It's strange because it also translates into the mental patterns, the self-defeating patterns that we get locked in our bodies. We've actually found psychosomatically when we relax these patterns physically that people are locked into, often there's a lot of emotion and things they've been holding on to, anger, rage, injustice, whatever, that they've had locked in their body. I don't know if you've ever seen people feel an emotional
Oh,
release.
yeah, we have people crying all the time.
When you straighten this up,
When they shut off.
they feel joy and they release. There's a release. But these things get trapped in these patterns of our lives that are limiting patterns. That patterns, they're pain patterns. We have this pattern of pain that we keep repeating. And it is very similar to the self-defeating patterns, decadent dance of despair that some people go through in relationships and the blame game and everything else. You know, holding on to rage or anger or injustice. He wronged me, like it's like it's an asset, when in fact it's a cancer eating away. So all you're doing is identifying these imbalances, teaching people how to correct it by resisting in certain ways on the zone restorator.
Or relearn.
Pardon me?
Relearn. I wouldn't say correct, I'd say relearn.
Relearn. So you're teaching. So when I got up this morning, I put my foot on the bottom of the bed and kind of pushed up and kind of did a type of exercise similar to what the machine had me do. And I felt a similar type of procedure to what I had on the machine. But it wasn't as good as the machine really helped me zone right in to that area. So that's excellent. What an informative session. Now, Doctor, how many treatments do patients have to be guided through to relearn the pattern? Because I had a good night's sleep my first night after being treated on this machine. But I'm not corrected. I mean, I'm corrected enough so that the pain, I could sleep through the night. But I can tell you, I sense still some imbalances and patterns.
And you do. When we looked at you, still are
Yeah.
off. And everybody's going to be different. I would say the more you could do it, the better off, the sooner and faster you'd be able to get out of a pattern.
Well, research, I'm going to take a little photo here. Research shows that it takes about 21 days to learn new habits, mental habits, to break old mental habits. Okay, I would say that's a pattern that may be similar with the physical body to learn new habits.
Sure, but you need, and strength-wise, you're always going to need 6 to 8 weeks.
6 to 8 weeks of targeted exercise on this hamstring.
But the whole thing is, if you can change the habit of how you're functioning, you'll use those muscles when you ambulate, when you walk. So you'll be strengthening just to survive if you stay in the right position. So if you change that pattern, the goal would be that you walk and breathe with those muscles on.
Well, I've already learned, first of all, anytime we learn something new, we go through 4 stages. The first one is unconscious incompetence. The second one is conscious incompetence. And then we get to conscious competence, which I'm not even there yet. Eventually, I'll get to unconscious competence.
Yep, and that's the goal.
Where I realign my body.
Yep, that would be.
But I can tell you this. Yesterday I became awake. I became aware for at least the period of time I was on the machine and I was being intaked and you identified the imbalances. I became aware, I knew something was wrong and out of whack, but you targeted where it was, and it was very impressive for me to be able to say, wow, this left hamstring is very weak compared to my right hand. I'm doing the same thing with both, but my left one's in pain. And not real pain, but there was a burn. It was like a very weak muscle complaining much more than the other muscle.
Woke him up.
It woke him up. But it also woke up my mind to an awareness of these positional issues that I naturally gravitate to. So, not that I still fall into them, because I'm just now waking up and becoming consciously out of alignment.
You're aware.
I'm aware now, so I'm awake. Before I was totally asleep to what was causing my pain. At least now
You're you.
I'm identifying. Now the goal here is to become consciously competent, and as I think about it throughout the day various times, I'll be able to correct these. And
Yes.
when I see myself standing on my right leg, I can stop and shift weight. But throughout the day, I'll fall back into these unconscious patterns and slip back into those ergonomic, repetitive motion positions
Yep.
that lead to pain and imbalance. But if I correct this enough times through conscious competence and being awake and aware, eventually I'll re-educate my body and relearn unconscious positional
Yes.
patterns that will restore my neutrality. The body loves balance. You have opposing muscle groups, and when they get imbalanced, you get all kinds of issues with those imbalances, correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Doctor.